Live in Tehran, Ramallah and Islamabad, first to Osama Bin Javaid in the Pakistani capital, near the venue of those talks. Osama, of course, we've been saying this ever since they started. So much at stake in Islamabad. Talks we now know have officially begun. Do we have any idea on the shape, the duration?
Well, it is a historic day. As you mentioned, this is the first time that we're seeing the highest level of contact between the United States and Iran after the 1979 revolution. We believe that the talks lasted for just under 2 hours. It was, according to sources, done in an atmosphere which was positive. There have been a number of issues that have been discussed, and some of them are the sticking points that we all know about. But we believe that there has been some headway in terms of what is happening in Lebanon. Some sources suggest that it is now going to be limited to operations in the south, and there will be no further strikes in Beirut. Again, I mean, this is very early hours, and we're still waiting for confirmation. We're also hearing that there is some movement, according to Iranian sources, that there is going to be a move towards assets being unfrozen. But again, what we know is that it is all happening behind closed doors. Drip information is coming out, but it is very difficult to verify, and we'll have to wait and see what happens next. The two parties are going to meet again over dinner. And to discuss all of this with us is Abbas Aslani from the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in Tehran. Thank you very much for taking the time. You've been talking to people who were inside. What is your sense? Are we heading towards a positive direction? Because just them meeting at this highest level is a positive sign, isn't it?
Well, we are on day one of these negotiations, yet that is significant. The progress which is being made is, gradual, small, and initial. And there have been some discussions generally about the framework of any final deal or potential deal. And but mostly part of those discussions have been focusing on steps which could not be the core demands, but trust-building measures like Iran expecting the United States unfreezing its frozen assets. This is considered from Tehran's perspective to be a trust-building measures. And but in terms of Lebanon, there have been very little small progress on that issue. But I think Iran will yet insist on resolving the issue completely. However, I think much time is needed to discuss the other aspects of any potential deal, and this is, I think, now is a bit early to judge the whole process. We have to wait to see how this round will end and whether another round is expected, and the timeline, the timing, and the quality and the level also will matter. I think
we have to wait and see about the substance. We've been speaking to diplomatic sources in Pakistan who say that they're ready to provide the requirements that are needed for if these talks progress to multiple days or a second round. Just on the issue of this highest level of negotiations, we've heard previously there's been contact between foreign ministers, but this is the first time that the Vice President of the United States is meeting the Parliament Speaker. Do you believe that the Iranians' insistence on having J.D. Vance is helpful to steer it in the right direction? Because there's still so much mistrust between the two sides, and they remain really poles apart.
I think the level is very important because this has been the first time at this level Iranian and American officials are meeting since the 1979 revolution in Iran. Previously, during the Iran 2015 nuclear deal, the discussions were at the ministerial level, but this time that's different and higher. But in addition to that, this stems from Iran's distrust toward the previous negotiators or top negotiators from the American team. And during two rounds of negotiations back then, Iran was attacked militarily, but also the approach by J.D. Vance, he's been known mostly to be against the war, also provides a chance for, let's say, for a potential deal between the two sides, because there were some speculations that Trump is not fed with correct information on what's going on. And this is maybe another chance to see if the process was something wrong with the process, or that was a bigger decision in the U.S. administration to engage militarily
There
with
are
Iran.
new people in charge now with the IRGC on the diplomatic side, on the Iranian governance side. Does this mean that there is credence to what the U.S. president has been saying, that this is a new regime, this is a regime which is open to new ideas, which is going to be more amenable to what the United States wants? Because the conventional wisdom was that new people in charge need to prove themselves on the battlefront before they can actually come to the table.
Regime change has a definition which includes, changing constitution, the whole system, or the approach, behavior. But we have been seeing is, assassinations despite in high levels. The person sitting at the top of the hierarchy was killed. But we have been seeing a kind of, let's say, continuity in the policies. However, we are seeing new officials, assuming and replacing the previous ones. This might have some impact on the Iranian policies when it comes even to foreign policy, however, even relative. But we are seeing the negotiating team mostly from the foreign ministry or those who were in the Supreme National Security Council are yet in the same team. But this is something I think we can judge maybe in the longer term. What we so far we have been witnessing and what Tehran is arguing is that there has been no change in Iran, and that is the U.S.'s changed, position as a result of the, consequences of the recent war against the country, like the pressure in terms of the global energy market, specifically when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the failure in achieving the strategic outcomes of the recent war.
Abbas Aslani, thank you very much for that. So we're hearing positive tones, a historic day, the sides meeting for the first time with the interlocutors in the middle. But all of this has to be bridged on the sea of distrust, where both sides, we believe, are going to now break into smaller specialized committees, and these talks are going to continue. We'll have to wait and see on the specific details when the mediators and the parties come out of the room.
Thank you, Osama. Osama Bin Javaid in Islamabad there. Also in Islamabad is our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. Good to see Kimberly. So is the America First delegation there for a patient diplomatic breakthrough, do you think? How has the groundwork been laid by them immediately before these talks and as they begin?
Well, there's no question that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, was careful to lay a groundwork that was at least somewhat conciliatory. He said right before he arrived here in Islamabad that he was willing to negotiate with an open hand if Iran negotiates with good faith. But the U.S. president is always looming large. And even though there was the desire perhaps to have the Donald Trump in Washington and have that geographic separation, social media also makes it possible for the U.S. president to be in the palm of everyone's hand, including in that room. And that is where the U.S. president has perhaps injected a bit of tension into what otherwise started out as a relatively relaxed atmosphere, given some of the body language when the arrivals first occurred at these talks. The U.S. president posting on social media, railing at the U.S. media for saying that Iran is winning and winning big. In fact, he says that they're losing and losing big. So the U.S. president really hampering the tone with his typically bombastic language, which is certainly making it more difficult for J.D. Vance, who is tasked with trying to end a war that he never really wanted to start in the first place.
Yeah, well, following on from that, Kimberly, I mean, how is the delegation managing the intense Iranian distrust? Is there any attempt to backtrack on Trump's threats to erase an entire Iranian civilization? That only a few days ago, on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right. And what we know is that just by putting J.D. Vance at the helm has been a conscious decision on the part of the United States delegation. And there are a number of reasons why. First of all, you have the fact that the Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, well, they're not even seasoned diplomats, and these are some of the most important talks, as we've been highlighting, in decades since the 1979 revolution. So the fact that this is so delicate and is with unseasoned diplomats is part of the problem. And so as a result, that is why J.D. Vance, who is seen as being very adept at foreign policy, is leading this. But also there's the concern that Iran can't trust the United States. Is this a pause to simply rearm, as the U.S. president has suggested in some of his public statements, that if these talks fail, that he's ready to launch his armada of ships at a moment's notice? But also is the concern that essentially these two people were there when there was a deal that was struck to prevent all of this conflict. Oman said that it's within a grasp, and yet then the strike started. So as a result, there is an intense feeling that the Middle East envoys can't be trusted, and that's why J.D. Vance is, on the part of the United States, leading this delegation, which we should point out other U.S. officials have said that they hope that there is the prospect for breakthrough, and if not, they have, quote, backup plans.
All right, Kimberly, thanks for that. Kimberly Halkett in Islamabad. Let's go to Tehran, speak to Ali Hashem. So, Ali, what is riding on these talks for ordinary Iranians? Talk us through perceptions there.
Well, the ordinary Iranian wants this whole episode to come to an end. Now, how would this episode come to an end? It's really a very long story, because it doesn't start with this war. This war is just a result to an accumulation of elements and reasons for the past 47 years. The main issue for the Iranians with respect to the United States is to have the sanctions lifted. Sanctions have been curbing this country's economic hopes and aspirations, and also have been suffocating people's the reflection of these sanctions on people's lives is clear, and this is the main issue that people would love to see something being solved about. Now, with respect to war, no one wants a war, but it's a ceasefire. The problem is that these talks for the normal Iranian is also built upon a pillar of mistrust. In the past, there have been a lot of issues with the last two rounds of negotiations. They were followed by wars. And at the end, even when the 2015 deal was struck, the Iranians weren't able to take the benefit they wanted from. Still, despite the fact there were a kind of a relative lifting of sanctions, but they could not transfer money, they could not receive money, and investments didn't really pour into the country the way they were feeling or imagining, and that's what caused a reaction towards the deal. And of course, we saw after that the protests in different waves till the latest protest a few months ago. So the issue for the Iranians, how to solve this issue completely, because it has a lot of strings hang to it. And they know the war is the last episode of a very long series of misfortunes.
Ali, in the immediate, I mean, does the delegation in Islamabad, we understand it includes around 70 officials in total, does it have the authority to make concessions and demands in these talks? Are they the ones driving things forward? Do they have authority?
Well, the fact that, yes, we are seeing people with authority that represent the multi-layer institutions within the system. Now, on the Iranian side, there's 70. On the American side, I think the number is even bigger than that. However, this is not the issue. It's not about numbers. It's about what are they going to agree on and whether there is time for agreement. Because what we're hearing is that these talks are going to last for one day and then no one knows what's going to happen. The delegations will get back to their countries. In the past, I remember covering the 2015 deal in Vienna, and both delegations were based in Vienna for around 18 days, from the 27th of June till the 14th of July 2015, in order to reach a deal on the nuclear issue. What about the situation now, when it's not only about the nuclear issue, it's about all the issues that are between the United States and Iran since 47 years, the ballistics, the access, the regional influence, the internal issues, the nuclear issue, and now, we have this new issue that came, which is the Strait of Hormuz, that seems to be overwhelming all the other issues. So how are they going to be to solve all these problems in one day? This is actually the biggest question facing everyone and adding more skepticism to these talks.
Ali, thank you. Ali Hashem in Tehran. Well, Israeli forces have escalated their airstrikes on southern Lebanon, killing at least 10 people. Multiple towns and residential areas across the Nabatieh district have been targeted. Health officials say the strikes caused extensive destruction to homes, infrastructure and civilian facilities. The attacks in the south come as Israeli and Lebanese envoys are expected to meet in Washington on Tuesday. Hezbollah has not been included in the negotiations. Let's speak to Nour. Odeh. She is near Ramallah and is following the Israeli government's reaction. We know, Nour, that an end to hostilities against Lebanon was one of Iran's key demands going into talks there. In terms of the wider context, Israel is refusing, we know, to negotiate with Hezbollah. But do these negotiations with the Lebanese government on Tuesday in any way look promising?
Well, not as much as many would hope, for several reasons. Any negotiations with Lebanon would have to take Hezbollah into account, regardless of the red lines that Netanyahu has boxed himself into. Now, Netanyahu and the Israeli government are going to Washington almost kicking and screaming, because this is not what they had wanted. But according to Israeli reporting, they were instructed by the Trump administration to dial down the attacks, to stop attacking Beirut, and to engage with the Lebanese government, which had broken a Lebanese taboo to offer direct negotiations with Israel, not so much just to talk about Hezbollah or a ceasefire, but to end once and for all these outstanding issues with Israel, namely Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory, the fact that it doesn't want to demarcate borders with Lebanon, and the fact that the current government is talking about annexing up to 10% of Lebanon. So both parties are going there with a lot of baggage, because they weren't given much choice, because the Lebanese government doesn't want another government speaking on its behalf. But right now, the composition of the delegations, what will be the substance, is all vague. And most important, Israel continues to bomb Lebanon, and that is something that will make talks unsustainable from a Lebanese perspective. Israel knows this very well, and that's why there's some chatter in Israel about possibly an impending Israeli announcement, because of American pressure, of a suspension of airstrikes come Tuesday to allow for that meeting, that initial meeting at the State Department to take place.
Nour, domestically, how is this all playing out for Prime Minister Netanyahu?
It's been nothing short of a nightmare, Neve, for the Israeli prime minister. His numbers are plummeting, which is contrary to the conventional political wisdom in Israel, when prime ministers usually used to go to war, then claim victory, crush the adversary, and usually that's a smaller non-state actor, a militant group of sorts, Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. Those numbers go up. What Netanyahu has seen, especially after the war that he picked with Iran, is that his numbers are down, and that his main challenger now is not in the conventional opposition in the so-called center or left, but it's in the Israeli right. The former prime minister, Naftali Bennett, is poised to win more seats if elections were held today, and that puts Netanyahu between a rock and a hard place because he has been trapped by his own declarations of victory, which contradict reality and the assessment of generals and former officials that Israelis trust a lot more than their prime minister, according to the polls. So he has to, on the one hand, keep his coalition together, keep the right-wing base that he counts on for support engaged and convinced that he can deliver something, and at the same time not upset Donald Trump in the United States, because also without Trump's support, Netanyahu would be in an even more difficult position when it comes to the regional situation and all the war fronts that Israel has raging across the border.
Understood. Nour, Odeh, near Ramallah there. Thank you.